Speakers of this afternoon are Sam and Travis, who will be talking about Kno2 MuleSoft, which to me sounds like a very delicious French wine.
Thank you all for sticking around. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss some of the exciting stuff we have going. So I'm Travis White. I serve as the Senior Vice President for Solutions Strategy at Kno2 and oversee the partner experience, and I'm joined by Morgan.
I'm Morgan Pape, Account Executive at MuleSoft, pinch hitting for Sam, who had a health-related incident, couldn't make it today. So, and I am the Account Exec for MuleSoft, overseeing the CHOP account, and appreciate the partnership with CBTN and Adam and Allison and the entire team. So you're probably asking yourselves, what is MuleSoft? MuleSoft is a company owned by Salesforce. They bought us in 2018, 6 years ago, and we exist to help you connect your systems and move data from system to system, wherever it is going to serve the greatest good. And it's not just connecting systems, but it's also enabling you to reformat the data, talk in any standards, and really get the data to where it's going to be the most valuable in the hands of your end users. Okay, so our Anypoint platform is a cloud-based integration platform that enables you to develop APIs, manage APIs, and extract, transmit, and insert data into systems securely, confidently, real-time, or batch. API is an application program interface. It's how computer systems talk to each other. It knows the language of System A and System B, and it enables talking to your systems, whether it's your Epic EMR or your HR system to pull payroll data. It's how computers talk to each other. You can skip this slide. Okay, so what are we doing at CHOP and supporting CBTN? They are using our healthcare accelerator, and we've built jointly a set of programmatic interfaces to extract data out of Epic, transform it, and then put it into their research data warehouses. We're also taking that same patient data and putting it into their CRM so that when patients or families call up to schedule appointments or have questions, they're working off the same set of data that the clinicians have in Epic. Of course, the researchers have a much more detailed clinical view of the data that we're pulling out of Epic and the lab systems to put into the CBTN warehouses. So we've built the extracts out of Epic into the data warehouse. We've built a connection into the Kno2 network, which Travis will talk about. And then we are also taking the data and populating it into Amazon's Health Lake, which is then what is powering the AI. Okay, so a little bit about the Kno2. Between Travis's team and our team, we've figured out all the process orchestration for how to identify the data, transform the data, and get it to where it needs to be. We've done the heavy lift for you. And just more about all the different connections and how we've parsed the componentry of the APIs so that they can be pieced together and repurposed for additional uses.
Thanks, Morgan. Yeah, so as Morgan indicated, Kno2 is partnered with CHOP and the initiative at CBTN here. We're a federally designated QHIN, to avoid the use of acronyms, Qualified Health Information Network, for those that don't know. Part of the relationship in the previous diagram and what we're about to talk about, I think is really important for this conversation. And I love the discussions that have happened up until this moment, specifically talking about the experience of data. It's one thing to get data, but it's a whole other thing to make it actionable and usable. And I think that the power of what this effort is allowing this multi-organization effort to really examine and also employ is the actionability of data, making it intentional at the point of care for those in the treatment relationship so that as they are providing care for that patient, not only can they ask questions as David gets more and more robust, but now, going back to what Allison just touched on, it's all about inputs. The better data we can feed it, the better knowledge that you can transfer from the human aspect of it into the ability for that AI to actually intelligently answer questions and accurately answer them comes from the other inputs that it's going to receive. And so when we talk about some of the opportunities around Kno2, For those that don't know who Kno2 is, it's not a fine wine, but it has aged like a fine wine. In that we've been around for quite some time. Over a decade, we've been serving the larger ecosystem of healthcare. We represent many different care settings in the care continuum. Some of the splattering of data that you see on the screen is really just a way to say we are passionate about healthcare and passionate about communication and connectivity. And we've done so very successfully well before we were a QHIN. But QHIN is just one of the services that we have essentially aggregated within the network of Kno2. As we step into kind of, okay, this is all great, but I didn't come here for a sales pitch. I promise you I'm not selling anything. The reality is we've done a lot of really exciting work. We've actually been able to partner with the teams at CHOP and with Salesforce and MuleSoft and Mean and Submit. Shout out to his partnership in this effort and all the team members. But it starts to bring into picture this vision that when Adam and I started talking about how can we get this information in the hands of those that are providing care when they need it, and how can we do so in a way that isn't so rigid that it requires semantics on both sides of the exchange, so that I can rely on my system to support multimodal data exchange between any of its CBTM participants, but do so in a way that isn't constrained because we didn't take on this massive technical effort to establish a point-to-point connection or point-to-point this and dig a trench between different institutions and each of these isolated data repositories. And so what you're going to see, we did prepare a couple demos. The good news is I'm going to quote whoever that was. I think it was the gentleman from Amazon who said the AI that you experienced that day was the worst you're going to experience. Allison struggling through the video launch was going to be the worst that you experienced, I think, but I might need help. So we're gonna play a video because we thought the pre-recording of a technical demo would be beneficial for the group. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Tarago. I couldn't remember his name. I appreciate that. Awesome, thank you. So send and receive is kind of this concept of multimodal data exchange that is enabled through this solution set. So we've got a mocked up example where you can see UCSF over on the left-hand side of the diagram. The intentionality behind this would be that if an exchanging party wanted to move content, whatever that content was, in a ubiquitous fashion, they would be able to do so through the use of this solution set. And without having to build a heavy framework or a heavy implementation, they would just simply be able to say, awesome, what is your Kno2 address? And we'll use that. And it will literally pipe that over, conform in between the exchanging participants, and allow that data to flow over to the recipient and ultimately be ingested. The flip side of that is that we want to automate the boring. So the abstraction of this is that we don't want to create the burden on the humans to do the manual effort. I loved that statistic about the registries, specifically how many hours are being spent and the number of human years that have been spent in a single year. This is kind of that loose diagram. The next portion is where you can see that data kind of moving seamlessly over to the AWS Health Lake, and this is where we'll launch the video to actually show you a demo where we have piped up a Fire bundle. That Fire bundle has been sent using this solution, and you'll see it seamlessly and in real time be consumed inside of AWS Health Lake, and then ultimately be made available for whatever clinical tooling that would be its beneficiary. So I will need help. I'm going to admit help for the video launch here. I don't think it's as easy as clicking the button. It is as easy. See, leave it to the human to overcomplicate it. I'm sorry. So here you can see the information has already been packaged up. It used the invocation of the send. That actually then was directly consumed and made available. Here we're just demonstrating with some clinical tooling as an example. We then do a simple read query to go confirm, and it was seamlessly ingested in as the patient resource was consumed and stored and made available in the data store. All right, so here we get into kind of the other use case. So the 3 use cases that the team has been endeavoring was sending, receiving, and finding. How can we find content as a treating provider in that relationship at a care event with a patient to be able to say, I need to increase my visibility to these outside records. How can I get my access expanded, and how can I get to these other records? So here is kind of a mocked up diagram, high level, obviously. But similarly, on the top left, the patient during a treatment care event, that logic will then determine when that triggers the query. That would then flow through the solution. That would end up querying the community and looking for organizations that know who has seen that patient and who has records on that patient. As a result of that, when that comes back, all seamlessly, of course, abstracted from the user experience of having to manually choose each of those specific steps. But then that would end up reaching out. It would query for that content. Ultimately, those provider organizations that held content within their EHR or their repositories would end up responding. And then that information would flow back through, and then through the solution set in general, it would then be ingested and then made available to the clinical tools. And then, as you can see, the arrow pointing back up to the care provider to provide it at the time they need it. And then the next step. So in this scenario, ultimately what you're seeing happen kind of flash across the screen is the seamless way in which not only the system goes out, reaches out for organizations that holds that content, consumes the ability of available data, and then actually ingests that data, and then turns around and transforms the CDA content that was available via the framework, pulls it back in, and then now you're going to start to see it map those to the resources available within the data set, and consequently the treating provider in the tool set that they're using. So you can see the patient resource, the condition resource, the encounter resource, all kind of mapping out here on the screen in real time. Procedure resource, and finally the observation resource. Awesome. All right. I think that concludes the portion of the demos, and I will turn it back. Or if there's open questions, I'm happy to take
Let
it.
me just connect a couple of the dots. So what you saw flashing across the screens are these API calls. The 2 examples that were given, and I think for us it was really amazing to sort of see this and built on all the work that we had done in Kids First, and the Include project of really, with Vincent and others, to implement FHIR as a standard for the model. What you saw there essentially is the system interacting with the EHR, pulling the data elements plus of what we normally, a coordinator would pull by looking at the Epic screen. So essentially it's saying, whatever is typically informing the screen for the coordinator, let me just go to the source, pull that data through into a common environment that can then is machine readable, it can be assembled into view. And the 2 use cases here that were shown is 1, how can I interact with a CBTN member directly, like a UCSF and a CHOP? How can we sort of establish that direct connection in real time? But then if you think about any patient workflow, we have 35 sites. Patients oftentimes don't start at one of our sites as the first place that they get care. So how do we get the data from other hospital systems before they arrived at CHOP, as an example? That's the second use case of leveraging that network. So it's assembling these data streams. And I think that's going to be, the experiment under ARPA-H, is to really say, okay, how do we do this compared to what a human would have done? How do we empower it in scale, time, quality, and then link it all together on behalf of that patient interaction, for diagnostics or any other context? So, it's always such a challenge and a credit to these guys. To see an API call is not so exciting to most people, but when it works, for those of us who have been challenged, it's euphoric oftentimes when you suddenly see this data flowing through. So credit to these guys. The only other thing I would say is it's been an amazing effort to work with Kno2 and MuleSoft, but the other amazing part is to work with CHOP's IS teams. Most of the institutional contexts, have a research IS and a hospital IS. ISs.
What is IS?
Information systems, right? So most institutions, right, if you any hospital system, you have a research team that manages you, and you have an enterprise team that manages the billing and everything else. And they're often segregated from each other. As part of this project, Jay Jenkins, who was here earlier, and his team really leaned in, right, across the fence, as it were, between research and clinical care in ways that align with everything you heard earlier, right, that all of our patients live in research care, right? They're not research, and they're not getting care separately. They're in research care. It's one of the first times that I really saw that happen at our hospital, and I think it's the transformational content that's really going to move forward.
I think that's spot on, Adam. And I think the other point, obviously we wanted to show something happening in real time and demonstrate that it's not just, vaporware or, this kind of ethereal thing that we can't quite get to yet. The realm of the possible is there. And I think that the practical application of it is when I think about a family and their patient showing up to a care organization because they've been through several care settings, making their way to CHOP and finally arriving. It's a pretty powerful thing when that history mystery starts to dissolve. And now their authentic journey is really known to the care provider. And not only that, but as a result of that care provider benefiting from that information at the moment of care, it then fuels the research that can be then done with those patients of similar disease profiles. And then again, it just accelerates that ability for the system to learn, research to advance, as a secondary benefit of the care provider actually getting exactly what they needed.